Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to another video on ForgottenWeapons.com. I'm Ian McCullum. I'm here today at Morphy's with this fully transferable Walther model of MPK submachine gun. MPK standing for Maschinenpistole Kurz. There was a companion piece that was the Walther MPL, which is the same gun but with about 4 inches more barrel. So for what it's worth, this is the short version, 6 3/4 inch barrel. The long version was 10 1/4 inch barrel. They both weigh about 6.5 pounds. This one's 2.8 kilos, 6.3 pounds. The longer version was just a little bit heavier at 3 kilos or 6.6 pounds. And this was Walther's entry into the post-World War II sort of modern third-generation stamped sheet metal, cheap but effective submachine gun market, intended primarily for military forces and law enforcement agencies. And it, in fact, did get used by some of those. Not a ton of them. This is a gun that was competing with the Uzi and the MP5 primarily, although this actually, it postdates the Uzi, but it predates the MP5. These development of these began in the late 1950s. They first went into production in 1963, which is a couple years ahead of the MP5. And they sold to a number of agencies, but they never became the top dog in this market. However, despite that fact, this really is a surprisingly feature-rich gun for something as simplistic looking as, well, as the MPK or MPL here. So let's take a closer look and let me show you all the different stuff that's packed into this design. Now, the long and short versions of the Walther use the exact same upper assembly. We'll take it apart here in a moment and you'll be able to see that. But I think they set the length of the short version essentially by the length of the stock, because this can't get a whole lot shorter before the stock is the longest part of the gun. So it really makes an appropriate length to pick for maximum portability, maximum concealability. For magazines, these use a 32 round magazine that is based on the Swedish Carl Gustaf or M45 magazine. This actually isn't one of them. This is a magazine from one of the Czech VZ24, I believe, pattern guns. It fits, and I think it would function. The previous owner has actually marked it as MPK, but it doesn't actually lock in the gun because it doesn't have the right notch cut to engage the magazine catch. So sorry, I don't have the proper original magazine for this, but 9mm, double stack, double feed, 32 round capacity. Now, unfolding the stock is very easy. There's no lock, you just pull it open. Refolding the stock requires depressing this button, and then you can fold it up. It is capable of firing with the stock folded. You can see the bend here to clear the ejection port. There's nothing in the way of the trigger. That'll work just fine. The stock is offset on the right side of the gun. They don't make any attempt to bring it back to the center line, but frankly, it's close enough that it really doesn't present any issue shooting right or left-handed. The stock is simple wire tube that has a plastic or a rubber, I don't think it's rubber, it's like a hard plastic coating on the outside of it, so that if it's very hot or very cold, you're not going to hurt yourself on the stock. It won't be uncomfortable. So that's a nice touch. The back end is flattened, so you don't have a tubular, a round surface to amplify recoil. It's a very simple stock, but effective. It does everything that the folding submachine gun stock needs to do. It is an open bolt design, and it has either a 2 or 3 position selector. So the default manufacturing style for these was 2 position, S for safe, and D for Dauerfeuer, or repeat fire, full auto in German. And that's why your initial 2 safety positions are safe, flip it down for fire, that's nice and ergonomic. You then had the option to also have a semi-auto setting on it, which is all the way forward. So E is Einzelfeuer, semi-auto in German. There was never a burst option on these, and frankly, I think burst is not that great of an idea. To me, safe and full is fine. Semi-auto is not a terrible idea if it's something you specifically want. So that's the right set of controls. These are ambidextrous, so you don't have an extended lever on the right side, but you do have a lever. So good ambidextrous, well set up controls. The magazine release is just a lever right there, also perfectly functional. The charging handle is located like at a 45-degree angle off the top of the gun, so it is easily accessible from either side. It is a non-reciprocating charging handle. However, you can push it in and it will allow you to force the bolt forward. So under normal circumstances, you cock the bolt open, it locks on the sear, ready to fire, and this is pulled back forward by its keeper spring. But if something happens, and it's hard to demonstrate this because the spring is pushing the bolt forward, but you can push this in and then you get the forward assist functionality if you want it. Now, one of the classic dilemmas of open bolt submachine gun design is the safety mechanism to prevent the gun from bouncing open and unintentionally firing if you have a loaded magazine and the bolt closed on an empty chamber. If you smack the back of the gun by dropping it on the ground, for example, inertia will cause the bolt to go backward. Typically, they can then pick up a cartridge, they'll then slam it into the chamber, and because this has a fixed firing pin, it would fire when it goes into the chamber. Walther's solution to that is excellent. There is a second sear catch that engages just before the bolt would pick up a cartridge. So if the bolt bounces open far enough that it might pick up a cartridge and fire inadvertently, the bolt catches there, the trigger doesn't do anything at this point, you have to cock the gun the rest of the way, and then it can fire. So if you have an accident, gun drops onto the ground, it'll lock there, and it remains in a safe condition. You can pull the magazine and close the bolt, open the bolt, whatever you want to do with it. These have a rate of fire of a pretty nice, relatively sedate, about 550 rounds per minute, which is a really good compromise. Too fast and you use up ammunition really quickly. 550 is slow enough that you can easily fire singles or doubles on full auto if you want to. Controllable, that's a good number to choose. And by the way, that number is the same for the MPK and the MPL because they do have the same bolt assembly on both guns. The grip and the trigger guard are quite large on the Walther. You can see, I could have an extra finger here and still have space for it on the grip. And this trigger guard is gigantic, which is nice. You don't have to make any sort of special accommodation for heavy gloves. Gun works just fine with them, which makes a lot of sense. That's something that perhaps more manufacturers could do right out of the gate. Now, feature-wise, it's the sights where this thing is really let down. So we have two sights here. We have sort of an odd style of rear notch and a rear aperture. And in theory, the notch is a 75-meter sight. The rear aperture is set for 150 meters. And they actually have two different front sights to use. So the post down here is for the aperture, and this top block is actually sort of a French style of front sight meant for use with that wide rear notch. And if you're using this sight, you just line this big block up in that wide notch. And if you want to make a precise shot, well, the little slot in the top of the front sight is your center position, and that's what you can line up if you want something carefully aimed and you're not using the aperture. That said, this rear notch is not great. It could be, I feel like if it were deeper and the front sight associated with it were square instead of trapezoidal, that would be better. And that rear aperture is just tiny. It's too small. I guess fine if you want to try and do match shooting with this thing at distance, but as a practical sight, I don't think it's all that great. There are a couple of screws here that allow you to manually adjust the position of the rear sight for elevation and windage, but then you lock them in and you zero the gun at the range and then you lock those down and don't move it again. Moving on to disassembly, this is really simple and really well thought out. There's one cross pin here that holds the upper and lower halves of the gun together. I'm just going to push this little spring inward to unlock the pin, flip it over to the other side, pull that pin all the way out. It is captive. It can be removed, but it acts like a captive pin at this position. And then I just pull the upper assembly back slightly, lift it off the gun. That has the bolt assembly, the recoil spring, the barrel. The upper has all of that in there. The lower simply has the fire control elements. And by the way, there is the MPL as well as the MPK. The lower assembly for both guns is identical. So you could take an MPL upper assembly and just drop it directly onto an MPK receiver. All right, taking the bolt assembly out, it just comes out the back of the receiver. This is a bolt that takes a lot of cues from the Uzi and from the Czech VZ23456 series, where the bolt face is down here. It has a fixed firing pin, so very simple. And the mass of the bolt is located above and forward of the bolt face, so that this sits right here, and you can have a minimal length of travel backwards because you don't have a lot of bolt mass back here. So you can have a short receiver, which allows for a very compact gun, which, I mean, you can see how short this whole thing is. The recoil spring is just held in with a little bit of tension. It nests up into the front of this bolt body, which is hollow. So it sits there. When the gun cycles, the bolt just travels back on this as a guide rod. It's worth pointing out here, this is a forged part that is then finish machined where necessary, but you've got the raw forged surface texture here on the inside where it doesn't matter. These machined silver sections are the only place where there's actually contact between the bolt and the receiver. So if you've got a bunch of gunk and grime in the gun, it gets pushed down into this area and theoretically doesn't interfere with functioning. In addition, you can see that the upper tube is stamped with longitudinal ridges. That's going to make it a little stronger for the same thickness of sheet metal, and it again, well, it also limits the surface area where the bolt's in contact with the receiver, which reduces friction. You can see the return spring there for the charging handle. We can take out the barrel by pushing down on this little spring catch, then unscrewing the barrel nut. It's just threaded on there. This is just a little fin that sets in the serrations on the back of this nut to prevent it from unscrewing under fire. Once that's off, the barrel just pulls right out. There is a small but real little machined metal trunnion sitting in the back that acts as the seat for the barrel. Other than that, like, this is all sheet steel. This is sheet steel. You can see it's the left and a right half welded together there. There's a little insert to properly set the magazine well dimensions. Even the fire control parts in there are mostly stamped sheet metal. That's it. That's the whole gun field stripped. In theory, you could pull these two pins and drop out all the fire control parts, but you don't normally need to do that. A very simple, very cost-effective submachine gun. If someone was going to take like all of the post-World War II, third-generation submachine guns and rank them in some sort of tiered order system, the Walther MPK or MPL is never going to be the top-tier gun. It's just not quite that. That position always goes to the MP5, and rightfully so. I think the biggest advantage that the MP5 has over the Walther is its closed bolt operation, which in a law enforcement context in particular is a really valuable thing. It allows you much more accurate, effective, aimed semi-auto single shots, which in a law enforcement context ought to be the majority of your actual use cases. The Walther has the option for a semi-auto setting, but it's still an open bolt semi-auto, which is harder to shoot effectively. I think the MPK or the MP5 also has better sights. The sights really are, in my opinion at least, the biggest downfall of Walther's submachine guns here. Interestingly, there are people who will say that the MPK and MPL have a very long length of pull. It actually doesn't. If you measure this out, the length of pull actually falls in between these two guys. It's actually a shorter length of pull than the Uzi, measuring length of pull being the distance between the trigger face and the end of the butt plate. However, the Walther feels like a gun that has a long length of pull, and the reason for that is the sight is both relatively far forward, it's much farther forward than on the Uzi, And it's a pretty small aperture, so you kind of feel like you have to bring your face really far forward on the stock to get a good sight picture with it. And that translates into the gun feeling awkwardly long, feels like it has a long length of pull, even though it actually doesn't. I think Walther had the opportunity to, I think they could have improved this gun with a better system of iron sights. But ultimately they didn't. They got enough small and medium-sized contracts to keep the gun profitable and in production for more than 20 years, and well, that's not bad by itself. So hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. Big thanks to Morphees for giving me access to this transferable example to show to you guys. Thanks for watching.